despair. When I thought of the words, I thought of Heol. Gloom, despair, and agony on me. The feeling of not having any hope left. It doesn't get much worse than that. And probably most of us have felt that way. Probably multiple times in our lives. Just really didn't feel that there was any hope whatsoever. Despair. As long as we can hold to a fiber of hope, we can manage. But what about when that's gone? In this text that we're going to read, I think the disciples of Jesus are at that point. John chapter 6, verse 15. When Jesus therefore perceived that they would come and take him by force to make him a king, he departed again into a mountain himself alone. That's interesting. You know, Jesus never denied the fact that he was a king. Those who judged him asked him point blank, "Are you a king?" He didn't deny it. They were misinterpreting and misunderstanding his role as a king. So in pure layman's terms, he would have been saying, yes, I am a king, but my kingdom is not of this world. They were talking purely earthly king. Jesus' popularity at this point is real high. Not with everyone, but with most of the common people. And Jesus got word, or had a sense, probably both, that they were going to approach him about becoming the earthly king of the Jewish people. That's what they'd been praying for centuries. They were looking for another David. Jesus knew that. And he knew that that was not his role. So to squelch that, He departed from the disciples. And it says he went up on a certain mountain alone. We'll find out in a moment what he was doing. Verse 16. And when evening was now come, his disciples went down into the sea and entered into a ship and went over the sea toward Capernaum. And it was now dark, and Jesus was not come to them. And the sea arose by reason of a great wind that blew. So when they had rowed about 25 or 30 furlongs, they see Jesus walking on the sea and drawing nigh unto the ship. And they were afraid. But he saith unto them, It is I. Be not afraid. Without a doubt, some of the most comforting words that we could ever hear. Not audibly, but Jesus speaks to our spirit and says, It is I. Be not afraid. Then they, the disciples, willingly received him into the ship, and immediately the ship was at the land whither they went. I love that. Jesus comes into the boat, and immediately, guys, a 300 horsepower bass boat's pretty fast, aren't they? This was a lot faster. Jesus got in the boat, and immediately they're at their destination. That's quick. That's quick. How should we respond when we find ourselves in the midst of a storm and we're feeling utterly despaired, having no hope? There are 6 anchors in this story. Anchors given by God that can help shore us up when we're in the midst of a storm. First of all, no matter what the condition is, no matter how bad it seems, we need to remember as children of God that we are governed by His providence. We are governed by His providence. The disciples are down on the sea. A storm comes up. That's not unusual. We read that several times in the gospel. They're doing everything within their power to stay afloat. And they're at the point, I am thoroughly convinced that they've given up. We're not going to make it out of this one. Now keep in mind, this is early in the ministry of Jesus. The disciples are not seasoned veterans yet. That's why they are in deep despair. But that's the disciples. Jesus is up on a mountain. He's separated from them. And what's going on, get this, what's going on down on the sea does not take Jesus by surprise. He knows everything that's happening. I think it's also noteworthy to point out that the disciples were not where they were because they made a huge mistake. There was nothing threatening. The Sea of Galilee was that way. I've told you many times, it's down in between two huge mountains, and winds would come down those mountains and travel across that body of water and go up the other side. And it would get down in there and it would just churn. This isn't the only time that they're on the sea and have trouble. But they were not there because of some foolish mistake. There's every reason to believe that when they shoved off, they were going to the other side. There was nothing wrong with that. They were on a journey. They were going to the other side. There was nothing threatening. Those storms come up quickly. Now, there are times, and I want to point that out because there are times that we get in deep despair. And in reality, it's of our own making, right? We do something that's just totally foolish. And we find ourselves in despair, having no hope. None. And when we are honest, when we look back, when we do a reality check, we realize, I brought this on myself. I'm where I am because of some foolish choice, some mistake. That isn't the case here. They were just traveling across a body of water. When we face an unexpected storm in our life, sometimes they can seem contrary to us, right? You ever consider this fact? Not saying that we have done something foolish and brought this on ourselves. It's a surprise thing. We don't know that we have done anything wrong. But we find ourselves in this horrible storm and we don't understand why. Think of it this way. We may be in the middle of a storm, but it's actually within the providence of God. What was that first point? We are governed by His providence. This storm did not take Jesus by surprise. No. Number two, we are growing by His plan. I mentioned this Wednesday night. We were talking about stress. I mentioned this. Looking back at my own life personally, some of the most difficult, stressful things that I have ever gone through, periods in my life that were so antagonizing, so stressful. Looking back later, I was able to see that I actually grew during that time. I come out as a better person. Even have to have gone through some catastrophe. I am thoroughly convinced that sometimes, and I don't want to picture that God is up in heaven and just having a field day watching us squirm. No. But I do believe this, that the intent of God when we are saved is to mold us and to shape us and to conform us into the image of His dear Son. And sometimes there's no other way for us to be shaped and conformed and become a semblance of the Lord Jesus Christ without going through something horrible. I have a book of Adriisms. I found this one. I thought it was good. Faith, like film, is developed best in the dark. There's been times that I have laid my head on my pillow in darkness, feeling despair. And at those moments, sense and feel the presence of God. Number 3, I am graced by His prayers. Now, the disciples are in a boat. They're down on the sea. They're rowing. They're doing everything within their power to try to stay afloat. Where's Jesus? He's up on a mountain. He was alone on a mountaintop. You know what I think He was doing? And the reason I can say this with assurance is we find this often in the life of our Lord. I believe He was alone on the mountain and He was praying. I think He was communing with His Father. He did that often. He spent time with His Father. And I've often thought, if the Son of God felt it needful to spend time with the Father, how much more should that mean that we spend time with Him? I don't doubt for a moment that He was communing with the Father. Remember, He had gone there because He knew that the people were going to try to incite the others to make Him a king. And He knew it was not His time. No. I think He talked to the Father about that. And it's evident to me that the Father said, "You're right. It is not your time." But I believe He was not only praying to the Father about things between himself and God the Father. I think he was praying for the disciples. You see, he could watch. From his vantage point up on that mountain, he could see that storm began up here on this mountain peak, coming down that mountainside, getting ready to head across the sea. He could see it. And I believe he was closely observing his disciples. That was a blessing to me, because we know that one of the chief things that Jesus does for us now, at present, where is he? He's at the right hand of the Father, right? What's he doing? Just hanging out with the Father? Talking about old times? No. He's observing us. Every one of us. See, he's God. He can see everything Bob's going through, and he can see everything I'm going through at the same time. And he can see everything you're going through, because he's God. He is observing. He's watching. And I think he's praying. I think he's praying for us. Before Jesus left, he went to the Father and he said, Father, keep them. He's talking about his disciples. Keep them. Being God, he knew the choices they were going to make, and they were not good. Do you realize that Jesus knew that Simon Peter would deny him before he ever denied him? He predicted it. Lord, I will never deny you. And Jesus said matter-of-factly, in fact, Simon, you will deny me, not once, not twice, but 3 times. And the signal will be the crowing of the rooster. Jesus knew that before Simon Peter ever did it. Only God could do that. And he said, Father, keep them. Keep them. I have given them your word. Keep them. But here's where it really gets good. He prayed not only for them, he prayed for himself also. This is right before Calvary. He prayed for himself, he prayed for his disciples, and guess what? He prayed for every one of us. Do you know that? You're sitting here 2,000 years after the fact. And there was a time that Jesus prayed for every one of us. That's just incredible to me. Number 4. I'm gladdened by his presence. In verse 20, Jesus sees that the storm is about to overtake them. So immediately, he's down on the sea, walking. Now, they're already terrified. They think they're going to die. They're in despair. And then they see some physical body walking across the sea. They were affrighted. They were afraid. And Jesus knew that. And he said, "It is I. Be not afraid." Then they willingly received him into the ship, and immediately the ship was on the land whither they went. It's very, very obvious that this was a God-given miracle. There's no other explanation. However, and get this, let this stay with you. More than miracles, you know what we really need? We need Jesus. That's what we really need. While he was on the earth, there were many that came to him, and in essence, they said, "Do a miracle. Do a miracle for us." All they were looking for was a show. Do a miracle. We want to see a miracle. Heal someone blind. Heal someone deaf. Cause someone who is lame to walk. Feed a multitude of people with a little bit of lunch. We want to see a miracle. And that upset Jesus. He said, "You are a generation of people that seek only after miracles." Do you know the real miracle of the incarnation? It brought God to the earth. We have Jesus because of the incarnation. Now, I thank God for those things that we can look at and say, God performed a miracle. I'm thankful for that. I would not diminish that in any shape, form, or fashion. But more than miracles, we need Jesus. And Jesus told the disciples, "It is I. Be not afraid." Then, after comforting them, he did do a miracle. He got into the ship and they were warp speed. They were on the other side where they had intended to go. Number 5, I'm guarded by his power. I love this statement. Get this, God's will does not take us where his grace cannot keep us. That's good. Anything, remember this, anything that's over our heads is still under his feet. Always remember that. God's grace will always be sufficient wherever we are, whatever our situation is. He has overcome the world, and the great I am is still the great I am, and he will continue to be. One more. I'm governed by his providence. Next time you're going through a tough time, consider the fact that unless you have done something that put yourself in that situation, you're there, and there was no reason for it to happen. You didn't do anything wrong. You are in the providence of God. Safest place you can be. We're growing by His plan. He's chipping off rough edges. When that verse talks about being conformed into the image of His Son, we all have rough edges. And Jesus is chipping them off. Graced by His prayers. Next time you feel like nobody cares, Jesus is praying for you, child of God. Guarded by His power. And number 6, guided by His purpose. Romans chapter 8, verse 28 is very familiar. However, Romans chapter 8, verse 29 is beautiful also. He, God, also did predestinate. The word means preordained, predetermined. He did predestinate that we be conformed into the image of His Son. That's what we were talking about. If you're going through a storm right now, and God is obviously permitting or allowing that storm, there's a reason. There's a reason. We may not see it. But part of trusting in an omnipotent God means that we can trust Him. That if we're in a season of storm, there's a reason. God has a purpose for every storm that you and I go through. Verse 21 says that we will come as He comes in the boat with us. We will get to our destination just like that. You going through a storm right now? My job is not to discourage you. My job is to encourage you. Are you going through a storm right now? Some of you are. It may not be that you're going through one. Hold on. There's one out there somewhere. It'll be coming. And everything that we have talked about this evening will apply if you're going through the storm right now or you're just waiting for that one that's out there on the horizon. And every single one of these anchors will apply. Let's stand very quietly.